I want to take the query here I made last time, where I had a single cell where you select the city, and then based on this table, I tell this table how it should be sorted and also how it should be filtered. And I want to turn this into a custom function instead, which would be a bit better for scalability if maybe you want, instead of having one output table, you want to have one output table for each city. And then you only have to write the code once and only have to repair it once. So I'll start out with where I left off, which is this query, and I want to turn that into a function. And I've actually already made pseudo parameters here, which I use as my variables. And that's the first thing I want to do when I want to make a custom function, is to make parameters, because you can change these just by making a drop down. And I want two parameters, which is the selected city and my source, because maybe I want to change the source and make that easier for my coworker, because right now this is a local file and the selected city should be based on the drop down. But in this case, when I want to operationalize it and make the function work for each city, I want that to be variable. And I'm only doing this so it's easier to change in the future, because again, that's the benefit of a custom function, is you can only change it one place and it gets changed everywhere. You could also go up here in data source settings and change that, but you might not know that because this is something I never remember exists. So I already have selected city and source, and I don't actually want city sort order as a parameter because this is based on selected city. So there's no point in having that be a parameter. And at this point, I simply want to take my original query and duplicate it, because it's usually easier to create what you want as a query using these parameters and then convert that into a function. We can call that filter and sort. And move these into a group just to make that simpler. And here, instead of having selected city, I want to actually delete these two steps, because I'll be referring to my parameters instead. And this will give me errors, which I then fix right after. Because right now I'm deleting these two and I'm referring to them down here. So obviously that's going to fail, but this is fine. If city, yeah, because I don't have city sort order yet because I deleted that. But instead of my file path being fixed, I want to make that into my parameter, which was p file path. And nothing has happened because it's the exact same information being passed in. And promoted headers is fine, and change type is fine, and filtered rows needs to be changed because I don't use the word selected city, I use p selected city. And here I need to add another step, which was the city sort order, because right now the function isn't grabbing that. So right after filtering, I want to add that as a step. Actually, I can do that in the source. That's probably going to be better, but then we need to go into advanced editor, which can be a bit intimidating. But I should just be able to pass this in and of course give that a name, which is p sort order. And then remember the comma, which it's telling me here something is missing. And then that's fine. Yes, so now we have p sort order, but again, it doesn't know what the selected city is because I need the p. Now I have the sort order based on my parameter p select city. I have my source based on p file path. I filter based on my p selected city, and all I need to do is fix the sorted rows because it doesn't recognize it doesn't recognize city sort order. It can't find that. So I can just hit F2. It doesn't want me to do that. Well, I'll just write it manually. So it's if p sort order is equal to ascending, which it is not, then I want to sort it as descending. And again, this means that if you've added a city to this table without adding sort order, then it's going to be blank, which means that it's going to fail the first step, because if it's blank, then it isn't equal to ascending, and then it will be order descending. So actually you don't even have to write descending here. And at this point, my table is fully based on 2 parameters, which the original query actually was already. And I can now simply right click and say to turn it into a function. So it is honestly that easy. And you don't even need parameters. You can go in and fix the code after turning it into a function. But this is more pedagogical. It's easier to follow along. And my function should be filter and sort, which I already have used that as a name, so we'll call that fun, filter and sort. And now that gets added in here. And again, I can always go in here and change my parameters, and that will be reflected in the query here, because this is the actual query which we use as sort of a helper. So if I change selected city to, I can't pronounce that. Then the sort order is still descending, so we'll turn it into Mandalay instead. Just because that has a different sort order. And that's still the same, which means that my sort order is ascending, and filter row is still on Mandalay, and sort rows is exactly as expected. And now all that's left to do is to make a copy of this. And all of these steps I don't need. I actually just need to call my function, I guess. Except I still want selected city and my file path. I can delete everything in the query 2, which we'll just call query with function. And I can delete that and that and that, because all of that comes from my function. And I don't want city sort order, but I need to change the name, and you can't change. Okay, I can change it. It's just if there's a step called source, then you can't do it. So that would be file path. And I'm going to select that and pass that in here. So I have selected city. And then here, if you want to make this into like this, where you do each city one at a time, then you'd want to call this Mandalay. This is a good place to mention that I did something inefficient. Actually, I shouldn't have loaded the file as part of the function, because this way I'm going to load the same file many times. What I should have done is to make an independent query which loads the file and actually opens it. So I only open and download it once. And I should have wrapped this table in the Table.Buffer function, which means it gets loaded into memory, and it's faster when you have to refer to it many times. Which means I shouldn't actually use the file path variable. And instead of having selected city, select something based on your drop down, because now we're not doing that anymore. So you could you can do this without the drop down. So here I would just say, instead of doing a function, I would manually write Mandalay. And my file path is still the same, but that can be changed, because maybe there's one city where you get data in another file, but it's the same format. And then I can call the function. And normally it wants you to call a function with a new column, but right now I'm in a text box, so you can't call a new function in a new column, because there are no columns, it's not a table. So I'll write fx, and I need the name of the function, and that is that, and then I pass in the 2 arguments. Oh yeah, and I need the hashtag quotation mark syntax. And then if I don't pass any arguments as parentheses, I'll get this helper, which also tells me the order. So I can now say my p selected city variable or parameter is called selected city inside my query, and my p file path is also called file path, and then this is fine. And now I can see, okay, well, I'm calling this function, and then I'm passing in selected city as the first parameter, and I'm passing in file path as my p file path. But all of the actual steps happen inside the function. So you can go in here and check, okay, that's intimidating to look at, so I'll look at this helper query. And you could delete these 3 parameters, well, the 2 parameters and the helper table, if you're confident you don't have to change any steps. But it's sort of clutter, but it's going to help you if you need to change it, because this is a bit more intimidating to look at. You can't see the individual steps. But now I can simply duplicate this and say these were called Yangon, And then we can simply load them, but I don't want to close and load because that would print all of my my parameters and my function and my helper query. So I'm going to say close and load to, and only create connections. And then I can say I actually do want to load this into a new worksheet, and Yangon new worksheet. And then of course you'd want to change the names here to be. Now we don't even need that drop down, and you would want to move this to its own page just so it doesn't add any clutter. But that is really everything I'd need to do. I'd probably want to add a macro to make it so these individual sheets get copied to a new book, and then they get saved, and they get saved wherever it is they need to be saved. That could be a SharePoint page or a temporary folder on your desktop, so that you can then manually review the tables and say, hey, if everything is good, then I send them. That was how to convert a function a query into an official function that you can then call. And it seems intimidating at first, but it really isn't, and it's so nice to work with functions when you have to call the same function. That is, you have to do the same things many times, because why do that when you can do it one time, and now you only have one place where you need to fix errors, so you can't accidentally forget to fix errors. But that is everything. Yep,